Okay. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of July the 11th to order. We are honored to gather on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And first item is the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, we have a delegation. The committee received the delegation of Sergeant Mike Newton, Conservation Officer, North Island Zone regarding wildlife awareness and the role of the Conservation Service.
Move receipt of delegation.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Mike, welcome. Come up to the mic. Mike, come up to the mic.
There you go. How's that?
That's
Better?
good.
Great. Thanks very much for the invite, Mayor Baird and Council. Appreciate it. It's been a little while since I was here last, but always great to come to Cumberland and just to provide a snapshot as to some of the bear activity, wildlife activity in and around Cumberland that we've been reported to our service. And I took the liberty of late last week just having a quick tour through town and taking some photos to provide a snapshot, a slideshow of what I'm seeing for attractant management. The Conservation Officer Service has been busy this spring with a lot of bear calls up and down the different communities in North Island Zone. Cumberland's probably been about the quietest. We haven't received very many calls for service, and there's a couple of reasons for that we can get into. Yeah, if we could just roll slowly through the slides here. Oh, perfect. I've got the control right here. Seeing some decent commercial bin metal lids, padlocks, garbage being stored separately from recyclables, really good practices for a whole. There's no doubt these, the bears that'll come into the community will test these all the time. So it's good to keep on with what you're doing. Cumberland's been quite progressive. And I know that you've been, utilizing your bylaw horsepower as well to make sure that folks are doing their best. Of course, there's always some reminders out there. I think this has used cooking oil containers, so provided they're dealt with before the end of business day and put somewhere properly, that'd be fine. But left out like that, of course, the bear's gonna have access to it. Some of the receptacles in town are more outdated. Some are more modern. But of course, with attractant management, it has to be consistent and it has to be at a high level. Sort of 3/4 of the cans being great and 1/4 of them not is still going to result in a bear getting access and becoming habituated. Again, just some snapshots of what I'm seeing from the super highs, top-notch garbage management and messaging. Really enjoy this kind of public messaging and the fact that you've put this in a prominent place in town and are assisting us and working together with us to ensure that bears don't become habituated to garbage. And then it's your bylaw is good too, because it specifically states that garbage can't be put curbside until the morning of pickup. So assuming this is a day of pickup, I think this is after school is out and the school's getting a good cleaning. Of course, no exceptions. If this is garbage day and the truck is around the corner, great. But if that were to be out overnight, then of course the bears could get into it. And a little bit of evidence that they are getting to some stuff. And we have had a couple of calls over the last month or so indicating that there are a couple of bears in the community now that have accessed a little bit of non-natural food attractant. But by and large, the tour I did was really good. But again, just another kind of point to keep that messaging going, keep that public education going, and keep bylaw services and that with their patrols to keep that in place. We've noticed in all our communities, the minute the public education and messaging and the horsepower around doing patrols, as soon as it wanes, and of course it's a slippery slope and it doesn't take much for there to be plenty of attractants. So. And of course, Cumberland, alongside Port Alberni is another community I used to work in, has as much fruit, both in residential yards, but wild fruit as well as any community, I think, on Vancouver Island. And that is going to just be an additional challenge for you in Cumberland. I mean, a few years ago, I remember being here with Frank Ritzy and doing an outdoor electric fencing public education session, and that is definitely the message to push. If people want fruit, electric fencing is the way to go. Pick the fruit as soon as it's ripe. Don't let it spoil. Don't let it lay on the ground. And if bears are using the fruit, then ask yourself the question, how badly do I need it? It's unfortunate a lot of people think it's okay for a black bear to be in a residential neighborhood in a fruit tree for days, weeks, months at a time, and they tell us all the time, well, what's the big deal? It's just fruit. But we sort of, we consider the fruit as almost like a gateway drug because it desensitizes the bears to human presence. It makes them quite comfortable in town. They compete over fruit trees, so often you'll see the dominant bears on the trees at night, and then the subdominant younger bears with less life experience, less manners, maybe less, not in such good health, etc., using it in broad daylight. And those are the bears that are brought into town, get into the fruit trees, and pretty soon people are walking by the tree and the bear doesn't even get down anymore. Maybe huffs and communicates if they're too close, and then that personal space ring of that bear gets smaller and smaller, and pretty soon, kids could be walking within a few feet of the bear and it doesn't care. And then one day, late summer, early fall, the fruit dries up and its time is done, and you've got a bear that's been used to living in a yard for a couple of months, and the hop skip to garbage or up on a deck or up on a porch or into some other more serious trouble is way easier for a bear like that because it's been desensitized. So that's definitely Cumberland's challenge, is how to manage fruit. We certainly view fruit when it's rotting and covering the ground underneath a tree as food waste and an attractant under the Wildlife Act. But while it's usable and in the tree, of course, then it's fine, but people need to manage it. And that messaging with neighborhoods and people, always the same question. If you're perhaps elderly and can't manage your fruit, then hopefully there's someone that can. There's quite a few communities that have fruit picking groups that can utilize that fruit, and the key is to use it as quickly as it's ripe, not let it linger. And then if there are bears using it, ask yourself the question, maybe it's time for the tree to go if I'm not using it, or get into the electric fence game and prevent the bears from accessing it, because it is long-term absolutely harmful to bears in town for sure. So your bylaw again is excellent. It's progressive. I like the fact that it specifies animal-proof location or animal-resistant containers. They have to be bear-proof, and that word unto itself can sometimes be tricky. People think that a closed snapping-lid garbage can is resistant or bear-proof, and it's not. Any of those plastic standard garbage cans are not bear-proof at all. Of course, the bear could just tip it over, jump up and down on it, and the lid's off. I like also that you have a set time in the morning that enables your bylaw folks and us to do patrols prior to that time or the night before and see if people are sticking to the collection curbside rules. That's super helpful because, of course, curbside garbage the night before pickup is like an open commercial bin. That's when bears feel safe, people are asleep, streets are quiet, cover of darkness, and they're into garbage if it's curbside the night before. So thank you for your attention to your bylaws. It's been really good, and it's been great to work alongside your bylaw officers over the years. And also really want to commend your use of the Wild Safe program over the years I've worked here in Cumberland. And I know that it may not be happening this year for a variety of reasons, but that's something certainly to revisit if at all possible, because that public messaging is huge, and it certainly assists us. I mean, we're looking after the communities from Union Bay North to Bella Bella. So I, would like to be in Cumberland more than I am. But having that additional horsepower and assistance for the public messaging and the PR piece and getting buy-in and letting people understand the correlation between available attractants, fruit and garbage, and bears becoming desensitized is of huge help that you provide us. So thank you very much for that. That was the quick rundown. I certainly want to thank you for how well you're doing. And of course, as always with this issue, because the bears are our ultimate report card, you've got fruit tree season coming right around the corner. There's immature fruit now. Now with a bit of heat and a couple more weeks, it's going to be probably 3, 4, 6, 10 times the number of bears that attempted to come through town and stay. So this will be the time of year when the bears give us our true report card as to how we're doing, and we may have to focus on certain trouble areas that they identify that if we haven't already spotted them. So.
Okay, we're going to go around the table for questions. Councillor Sproul?
Yes, thanks for coming to present to us. You probably do know that it took a lot of citizen effort and vigilance to reduce those numbers, people going around door to door. But ultimately, when we didn't just give nice little notes of reminders, when we started collecting fines, and that really works.
It does. There's a certain percentage of the population, unfortunately, in all of the work that I do, that's what they understand. Education will take you most of the way, 3/4 of the way or more, I'd say. But there's a percentage of people that understand a monetary fine or enforcement. And with the bears being active, we need 100% containment of garbage. So 75 isn't good enough. And then, yeah, the effectiveness of bylaws, linking bylaws to property taxes, etc., making them a useful tool that actually carries the intended purpose, carries the punch, is huge. Yeah.
May I ask one?
Yes, please do.
The cougars, that's earlier this year in the summer, I think it was you stopped, there was a girl running down the road and there was me walking, and you stopped to tell us about the park, the lake park, and there was a young cougar that was sick that had to be put down.
There was one in late May in behind Kendall that had taken an attempt at 2 different domestic dogs that were being walked on the trails behind Kendall. That's the one I attended. And that's the only one that I'm aware of that was...
There was a tent down there for one of the outdoor programs at Comox.
Okay, yes, was that last year?
No, it was just two or
Okay, it
three
must have been one of my partners that attended that one. But yeah, the Kendall one was unusual behavior. I mean, it happens on Vancouver Island a few times a year for sure. But when when a cougar is in close proximity to a community and focused on domestic animals being walked by people, that's a high public safety risk, and we respond to those. So it was necessary. It was unfortunate, but that cougar was still waiting in the exact same location when we brought the tracking dogs by, and it had attempted 2 different domestic dogs, and it was still sitting in the same spot. So yeah, our hands are tied in scenarios like that. It's just too grave of a public safety risk. It's when it's focusing on walking groups of people for a food source, we don't know where it's going to start or stop, So and thanks very much to Fire Chief Mike Williamson here, who assisted us in getting in behind some of those lock gates and that. So.
And you do report it then? What's the protocol after a citizen reports the cougar? Then do you then go to the fire chief? Like, what's the order of operations?
We go to the citizen, we ground truth the information, and then we act quickly. And in that case, there was only an hour and a half of daylight left, so we get right to trying to locate the cougar, determining if it's still on scene. So in that case, we use tracking dogs and talked to the 2 different complainants, corroborated their stories, found out it was the exact same location, went there and conducted the search. And it was kind of a tricky one, but we were successful. And then it was great that we were able to outreach to Mike for access. In that case, there was a gravel pit lock gate in behind Kendall that we needed to get down into. But sometimes we're off to the next call and we don't get a chance to update council or village staff. But it's amazing how quickly we get questions sometimes too. Word travels quickly, so with all the social media. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mike, for coming. This year has been dramatically different than previous years. Like we, where I live, have not seen bears for several years, and this year we have a bear every night. 2 nights ago there was one in the garbage at the seniors complex making a lot of noise because the lids, they're seniors, so they can't lift the metal lids, so they have plastic lids on top, so he just crawled right in and pulled out whatever he needed. So I'm sure they're trying to figure out how to deal with that now. I have a couple of questions. Just there's a lot of new people here, and there's a lot of concern about animals, and there is a lot of people who lived through a lot of bears being put down when the dump was closed, and they all moved into the village to get food, and so lots of us don't report. And then there's a bit of stuff around that. So just want to clarify, when people do see a bear, who should they be calling, and should they be calling every time they see a bear, because you'd be out here every day. So when does it become a problem, and when should they call, and then are they calling you, or are they calling bylaw? And I would assume that anytime you see a cougar, you'd want to call, but yeah. if
In
you
the
can-
community, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, great questions. Yes, if there's a bear in community and it's going yard to yard and it's accessing non-natural food attractants, because your bylaw is in place, I would ask that you'd phone both of us, so that we could do the assessment on the public safety risk of the bear, and the earlier the better, because our hope is that we could then deal with the attractant issues or the problems that are bringing the bear in early enough that that bear does not get habituated to the point where it causes a severe public safety risk. And catching it early is critical, because bears are so smart and they learn so quickly, and the garbage has such a rich food source for them that once they get onto it, it's a pretty steep learning curve. So calling us early versus leaving it, and then calling us when it's 911 is what our preference is for sure. That's what we ask people to do, and they do that through our RAP number. But yeah, bylaw, if you've got a spot like that, garbage at the seniors village that the bears are accessing right now, bylaw would be a great call. I understand some of the physical limitations, but there are bins out there that might be spring assist loaded, or there's got to be a different way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Plastic lidded dumpsters are not bear proof. So in that context, they don't really plug into the bylaw right now. All those plastic lidded dumpsters over hopefully a short duration of time should be swapped out. Something that is metal lidded and has locking chains or a locking bar. Some of the communities that we service, their developments, their new buildings, complexes are using garbage rooms. So the senior citizen can open a door and walk through into a garbage room. That's no problem. And then the waste disposal folks can access that when it comes time for pickup. And that's an excellent trend moving forward. We're seeing that in Campbell River, some of the new builds there. And that's going to help us immensely, because again, nighttime access of commercial dumpsters, it's a ton of garbage and they're a great food reward. It's usually separated from the main building by several meters, sometimes off to the side, close to a green space, and it's the easiest pickings for a bear to get into. And that's what really causes the troubles, because they start competing for that. If there's one or two really heavily used ones where there's lots of food value, the bears will start competing. They'll have a hierarchy, and then you'll have habituated bears to some degree knowing what they want but not allowed in by another bear, and they'll go walk about and they'll go yard to yard or up on porches and follow their nose. So those commercial dumpsters are a key issue to deal with. So
Yeah. And then I just wanted to mention, for people's awareness, there is a conflict between food security and living in a bear community. And unfortunately, lots of us are growing our own food, but that food needs to be managed in a way that is safe for bears. And so, like you said, picking when they're ripe, and if you have fruit trees that you're not going to harvest, Lush Valley does run a fruit collection program, and they will come and get your fruit. So, yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that.
perfect. And that
danger.
electric fencing is available at the feed stores, like up in Merville, Black Creek. And it doesn't take much, a couple of strands, around a vegetable garden. People do a great job of deer fencing because the deer are relentless, but a couple extra strands of electric livestock style electric fencing goes a long way to deterring the bears. So
Awesome.
we suggest that.
Okay, Councillor Kettler?
Thank you for the presentation. From what you reported, it sounded like we're doing okay with our public receptacles. That we maybe need to update a few more to bear proof, but it sounded like we were doing pretty good. I've seen some tourists struggle with our our bear proof containers and the foot pedal, and I've had to help a few people so that they're not only bear proof, they're also sometimes tourist proof. But anybody that is walking by can also help the tourist if they see they're struggling. The education piece, I was wondering, so the Wild Safe we don't have this year, but I think normally they would do a booth at our village market days. and that probably goes a long way for awareness in the community. So hopefully we can get that back. Is it your are you the ones that put on the electric fencing courses, or did we do that in conjunction with WildSafe?
That was a WildSafe
Yeah.
initiative as well, and there's
Okay.
a ton of information that they have on their website.
Okay.
So
So
it's-
getting them back to do another course is probably a good idea.
That would
as
be a great
well.
idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I always have my first complaints concerning raccoons in some areas, and how do we treat them? The people want to know what they can do.
There's also great information on the WildSafe website about raccoons, and also on our Fish and Wildlife website. Raccoons are one of those species of wildlife that do really well around people, much like a Canada goose. So anything that we have outside, they're going to get into, whether it's pet food, chicken feed, eggs, chickens themselves, garbage, fruit. So again, just casting an eye on your yard to reduce attractants is the first step. Don't feed house cats outside, for example. The raccoons will be right into the feed. And then if there is an issue, we defer those calls to pest control. So we don't get too many raccoon calls, but the ones that we do, we ask for the caller to call a local pest control company, and they have some options. You can live trap them and take them a very short distance out of town, for example, but there's certain times a year and things to know so that you're not separating family units and whatnot. But the biologists are concerned if the raccoons get taken very far from town about disease transfer, etc. But again, it's the same with any other wildlife conflict, casting your eye on your property and making sure that anything that raccoon is trying to get into, you protect as best you can. Yeah, it's difficult because they're small and wily and can get around stuff. But certainly bird seed, cat food, chicken feed, stuff like that should be locked down for sure. And then if you have an issue, then you can outreach to pest control. Raccoons will sometimes, cause a conflict with domestic dogs. It's not advisable to let your dog try and chase the raccoons. The dog will typically catch up, and then they can actually get quite seriously injured by the raccoon. The raccoons are ferocious when it comes to fighting with dogs. So we see sometimes some minor human nips and injuries when they try to break up fights like that. So we always ask people to be careful about that. Try and mitigate the attraction of the raccoon in the first place is the way to go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You gave us a lot of information tonight, and I'm sure the audience is listening to all of it, because we do have issues once in a while with a lot of different animals.
Yeah.
Because we're living in a wonderful community. So thank you very much for taking the time and being here this evening.
You're welcome. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Next, we have reports. The Committee of the Whole received the technical report, financial analysts for community amenity contributions, target rates, and revised density bonus rates. Report and the presentation by Urban Systems Consultants J.P. Lapointe and Jody Nige.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, it's working. I see JP, so that's great. So really, I'm just introducing the report briefly, and I'll hand it over to them to provide an overview of all the research they've done into density bonusing in the village and community amenity contributions, something that's been in the works for a little while, and we had a resolution to that effect dating back to last summer. So we're happy there to have them here and answer all your questions, and they can start out with a brief presentation and then open up for questions and discussion. Cool. Yeah, I'm just handing it over to you, Jay.
Gwen, do you want to move your mic closer to you when you talk?
I'm just figuring out the sound. 1 second.
Yep, we can't hear you, JP. Let me. Can you try now,
Okay.
JP? Can you try now, JP?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me now? Yeah, you can. Okay, great. Would you like me to share the presentation on my screen here?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
okay. I will do that. So myself and Jody, who's on this call, and my colleague Justin, put a report together, which I understand that you have. And we've just put together this brief presentation to describe some of the concepts, and hopefully this works. Are you seeing my entire screen or just the presentation?
We see your entire screen, so we see the next slide coming up as well right now.
Okay. Let me, I wonder how I can do this.
JP, it might be under display settings on top. There.
Okay.
No, it doesn't look like it.
Hold on. Maybe you might be better at sharing the screen, Jody?
Yeah, I can give it a go.
Yeah, or I guess sharing the PDF, I thought I'd do it with the PowerPoint, but if you share the PDF, that'd be great.
Sure, I can do that.
Sorry about this.
Okay, can everyone see that? I heard a yes, I believe.
Okay. So you can walk us through it. So the presentation just discuss briefly the purpose of the report, and we go through some of the key concepts because there's some technical components of the work that we're doing that are good to run through. And then we go through the results of all the different zones that we looked at, as well as the results from the community amenity contribution analysis that we did on 2 hypothetical sites. So what we were doing was we were looking at the viability of the existing density bonusing policy that Cumberland has, using financial analyses that were based on the current market performance right now. And you know, what's one thing that we've discussed is this is a point in time analysis that is looking at what construction costs are right now and what sales revenues are for different types of units. And it wasn't, no one thought it was going to work out this way, but this study was done at a pretty interesting point in time, with construction costs seeing some pretty significant rising, and sales revenues not quite potentially catching up. So, but yeah, looking at both the existing density bonusing and community amenity contribution opportunities in Cumberland. So next slide. So for the density bonusing, we looked at test case studies for each zone. And so we looked at what a hypothetical property size would be. We looked at what land values might be to acquire those sites, and we did a financial analysis looking at incorporating existing construction costs and the latest sales for apartments and townhomes, as well as industrial lease rates in Cumberland. And in the instances where the maximum density was not producing a viable project, we looked at what densities might be required to make those projects viable. And within the different zones where applicable, we looked at how the inclusionary housing policy was performing and whether the development could afford to include an affordable housing component. Next slide. So some of the key ideas that we're looking at is density bonusing. So density bonusing is a tool that's within a zoning policy. So there will be a base density that's allowed within a zoning policy. And within that zone, there will be the capacity for a developer to utilize bonus density, which they will need to pay for. So that is all within an existing zoning policy. Community amenity contributions are quite similar, but they would be incorporated when a developer has to rezone the property. So in both cases, the idea is similar, where the community is trying to capture some of the additional value that a developer will have access to through developing at a higher density, and with the idea of the payment, either the bonus density or the CAC, would help pay for amenities within the community. So the key difference is the density bonusing is already within a zoning, and the community amenity contribution is when a developer would be required to rezone the property. Next slide. Inclusionary housing is a framework or a tool to create affordable housing within the community, and it can be included as a type of amenity that a developer would pay either by utilizing bonus density or by rezoning and through the community amenity contribution. So how communities want to define affordable housing differs. In the RM5 zone that we looked at, the definition for affordable housing was 10% below the median rent in the Courtenay area, in the Comox Valley, I guess. But for other zones, we looked at 10% below market rates. So, that's differing levels of affordability in the different zones. Also, I'm happy if someone has questions as we go through, or we can wait right to the end. But if someone has a question that they want to ask, I'm happy to try and answer. Next slide, Jody. So this is just a very simple graph to try and describe the idea of when CACs and density bonuses are enacted. So on the left, you've got your blue square, which could indicate the land value based on existing density. And if a developer wanted to utilize the bonus density in a zone or rezone to build to a higher density, that creates a land lift because that extra density will create more value. The property becomes more valuable, and that increase in value we call a land lift. And so then the density bonus in the CAC would take a component of that land lift and retain it for different community amenities, whether it's affordable housing, recreation centers, parks, it would typically amenities that aren't included in a DCC plan. But that's the general theory, and the amount of the land lift that communities take. Some communities like Vancouver might take 75 to 80% of the land lift. Other communities might take 25% or even less. So there's a range of the amount of that lift that the community will take. But what's important and what the province really wants to see is communities with a real idea of what kind of amenities they're looking to generate. And, it helps to already, instead of just, putting the money into a pool, having an understanding of whether the community needs more daycare space, a recreation center, affordable housing, what have you, and whether the money should be directed towards one of those amenities. Next slide. So now we get into our findings for each of the zones. So looking at the VCMU1 zone, currently has a base density of 2.0 FSR, and there is not a bonus density within the zone. So when we looked at the base density of 2.0, it is possible to have a viable project at that density. One of the things that we looked at is what might happen if the base density was reduced to 1.5 FSR. And by doing that, you no longer would have a viable project for a developer. So the idea of reducing the base zoning to 1.5 for a current landowner, you'd be taking a property where there is development potential and eliminating that development potential. And then if you wanted to put the bonus density at 2, you'd be making them pay for the development rights that they currently have, which is a bit of a politically tricky move. So we don't suggest that the community do that, but it is a good idea to establish a new bonus density that would fit into the height restrictions that Cumberland wants to see. And we understand that there's been applications that had a lower ground floor to allow for more floors within a height restriction. So there's ways that, or including a mezzanine, there's ways to increase the amount of developable area within a height restriction or a limited number of stories. But our findings were that the base density is viable, and so to create a bonus density, we probably want to go up from the current base. The next zone that we looked at was RM1, and for this zone, the base density was 30 units per acre, and we did a bit of a calculation to transfer a units per acre density into a floor space ratio number, and we did that assuming standardized unit sizes. So townhomes, we assumed were going to be 1,500 square feet per unit. So with that assumption, and 30 units per acre, we were able to come up to an FSR of 0.41, which isn't in the actual bylaw, but that's what the FSR would be based on those unit sizes. So a base density of 30 units per acre, a bonus density of 40 units per acre, with a minimum of 30 units, 30% of the total units is affordable housing. Our financial analysis indicated that neither of those scenarios would be viable given the current construction costs and sales values. So we had to increase the density to up to 0.73 FSR to create a viable project where 30% of the total units would be affordable housing, which was would be 29 units out of a total of 98 units in the, I don't know what the actual site area was for this, but yeah, it would have to increase in density by a little bit to make a viable project. The next zone that we looked at, RM2, this density was actually proving to be viable at the base density at 0.63 FSR, 45 units per acre, and the bonus density was also viable. In the zoning, 20% of the total units needed to be affordable housing, and we found that this zoning was so viable that you could increase the amount of affordable housing that was required up to 30% of the total units, and we actually increased the affordability of these units to 75% of market value as well. So so that was interesting in the RM2 zone. Or RM3, sorry. Oh no, that was RM2. Yeah. Jody, thanks, Jody. So in the RM3 zone, this one was interesting because the base density was viable at a UPA of 34 units or 0.48 FSR, but the bonus density that they're actually the bonus density was so small that when we were including affordable housing that was required when you enact the bonus density, that the project became no longer viable just by a little bit. So we had to increase the bonus density from 0.62 FSR to 0.67 FSR, and then at which point the bonus density was viable, and the 30% of units being affordable was a part of that. So that was interesting for RM3. RM5.
Can I just interject briefly? Yeah, so just to clarify, sometimes you say units per UPA and then UPH. I think they're all units per hectare, right? That's what our zone says. They're all units per
right. Yeah.
Units per
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it should be UPH, yeah. So then RM5 is the rental zoning. So at both at the base density and at the bonus density, we were not able to make these developments viable from the same perspective as we were using for the strata units. So for the strata units, we were assuming that the developer would want a 15% developer profit, which is standard in the industry. Sometimes developers will take lower, but starting out at 15% is standard. For developing rental units, there are cases. So for RM5, neither the base or the bonus density were viable, but there are developers who are looking to build and hold on to rental units over the long term that will accept a lower return. And we see these types of developers in Greater Vancouver, and they're willing to accept less than 15% because they want the guaranteed returns for their investors. So these are almost pension funds, private equity firms that just want to have that guaranteed cash flow that a rental residential building will provide. So, the question is whether that type of developer would be interested in the Cumberland market. If they were, the base density would be viable. Because those types of developers would accept a 2% spread above cap rates. So it gets a little bit complicated, but all to say that it's possible that a rental development could occur given the right developer was interested in the community. But if it was a developer that just wanted to build a rental housing project and sell it, they probably would not go ahead at this time. Anything else, Jody?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Was there a question? Oh, okay, wait a minute. Okay. So if we go to the next slide, then this is, we looked at the I2 industrial zone. So we looked at, which has a base density of 0.5 FSR and currently has no bonus density. Right now, the base density of 0.5 allows for one caretaker rental unit. We looked at a scenario where the bonus density was doubled to 1 FSR with mostly additional light industrial space. And we saw that would create a viable project and create a bonus density rate of about $22 per square foot of additional space. So that was interesting. Obviously, at Bevan Road, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for industrial development up there. So we looked at this scenario. So then the next scenarios that we looked at that were the community amenity contribution, both for apartments and townhomes. So we initially looked at, our scenario was for a townhome development that was rezoning to a 1.2 FSR, which is a higher density than a lot of the zones that we were looking at, and an apartment density of 1.5 FSR on almost a 1 acre site, and the townhomes were on a 0.6 acre site. Unfortunately, both scenarios right now were not viable. We had to include the additional costs that would be involved to go through the rezoning process. And those additional costs made these projects non-viable. And, I referenced this earlier. One of the tricky things right now is we have seen construction costs just go through the roof. And to this point, we haven't seen prices react as much. And right now we're doing a very similar exercise to what we've just done with Cumberland with the community of Saanich. And construction costs are pretty similar, but the unit sales in Saanich are a lot higher. And even with the high construction costs, that community is, from our perspective, looking at the numbers, is seeing that projects can be viable from a developer perspective. But so far in Cumberland, when we did the analysis and when we were gathering the rates, we weren't seeing the level of sales values that could afford the construction costs and the increases in construction costs that we had been seeing. So that's what we saw in our analysis.
And just to add JP as well to JP's commentary is the apartments at density 1.5 FSR. We also tested a higher one at 2.0 just to see if that would make the project viable. And it didn't show project viability even at that density. So it really seems like it's coming down to the sales revenues of each of the apartment pricing. And also as interest rates are going up, like we think that would make it even more unviable over time. At this point in time.
So just as an example in Cumberland, we were looking at sales values of an apartment of about $500, $550, $600 per square foot on the high end. And in Saanich right now, they're getting $850 to $920 per square foot. So, for a 1,000 square foot apartment, if you could buy 1,000 square foot apartment or if you could sell 1,000 square foot apartment in Cumberland for $850,000 to $900,000, then you could have a viable project. And that's what's happening in Saanich. But what we're seeing, what we saw was apartments in Cumberland selling for $550,000. And given the increase in construction costs, a developer just wouldn't be able to afford to do that with assuming that they bought the land today. And so, all our assumptions were assuming what could happen if someone shows up, buys a property and tries to develop it. It's hard to account for someone that's owned property for a long period of time. We don't know how much they paid for it. And in that instance, that there's could be projects that could still go ahead. So I think we're getting close to the end here. So this is just saying that amenities, this is what I was saying before about how amenities, the community should have a list of amenities that are considered acceptable for community benefits, that developers know that if they're paying a community amenity contribution or a density bonus, that it's going to some specific amenities. And there are also, the first point is if there's a development proposal in a zone that does not have a density bonusing structure, and if they're looking to rezone, the community can always do a negotiated community amenity contribution as well. So we typically recommend that for larger projects. It's nice to have CAC rates for basic rezonings. If there's like a very typical rezoning from a single family zone to a townhouse zone, to have set community amenity contribution rates. But if there's a larger project that is quite complicated and includes a number of different components, it's hard to create a zone for something that you don't know what the plans are going to be. So in those instances, it's better to negotiate the community amenity contribution at the time of rezoning. So that was a fair bit, but that's the end of our presentation. Hopefully that makes sense, and we're happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much. I have one question, and it's just near the end when you were talking about the difference between Cumberland and Saanich. There's quite a difference in what you're saying per square foot. 500 in Cumberland and 800 in Saanich. Is that the cost of the land, or is that what they look at people purchasing the property?
That's what people are paying. So in Saanich right now, people are paying up to $850 to $920 per square foot for apartments. So a 1,000 square foot apartment in Saanich would cost around $850,000.
So you're saying that we in Cumberland could not get that price for an apartment in Cumberland?
You might be able to. What I'm saying is we haven't seen that.
No.
And so that's why, construction costs are pretty, construction costs have gone up everywhere. And the cost of lumber has gone up for everyone. And labor is tight for all different developers across. And it's not a Canadian problem. It's not a BC problem. It's everywhere. It's in the States. It's in Europe. There's a skills shortage, and that's increasing costs. So Cumberland has seen these costs increase, but so far we haven't seen the market in Cumberland respond with paying the prices that would be required to make projects viable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Councillor Kettler?
Thank you. Sorry, thank you for the presentation. This was quite a technical report, so I actually had to sit with it for quite a while and think about it. I was kind of struggling with like the floor space ratio and what that meant for building heights, and trying to imagine those buildings and those different building heights within these different zones, and sort of the acceptability of the community with quite tall buildings in these different zones. And as you probably know, we have a number of buildings on Dunsmuir that have gone up that are, 4 stories, and that was quite controversial for the community. There was a feeling that it really changed the feel of the downtown. But what you're saying from this report is we actually, within the VCMU1 zone, got that density right. That it's really the
as it is right now, the 2.0 density is viable in current market conditions. The thing is, that zone has a base density of 2.0. So right now, landowners in that zone can build to that density and not incur any density bonus payment. So if you wanted to get a fee, you'd have to allow an even higher density, unless you wanted to reduce the base density, which would be, a bit of a controversial move, because you're taking value away. Like right now, a landowner in that zone has the ability to build to 2.0 without paying any fee. If you want a developer to pay a fee, you have the opportunity to allow more density from what you're currently allowing. So allow more than 2.0, which could increase the heights to a height which is not acceptable in the community. Or you could reduce the base density, which is taking density away from the current landowners, which, you can understand that's a bit controversial. I mean, it's an option, but it could be.
Yeah, I think
wouldn't be.
Maybe we could think about, those business owners or landowners that have an application in already, that they would obviously continue at the old legislation. But if we decided to change for the future, that there is an opportunity to lower that density and make some kind of affordable housing possible, because I mean that's our goal, of course.
Yes.
Is to get, like a project where it is 20 or 30% affordable housing units, and it just doesn't seem like any of these options are really able to achieve that. We want to start hitting that side of the housing spectrum. We've got the market rental, and we got the market ownership, but we haven't got the below market stuff, and that's really what we need to be focusing on. I have a couple of questions. So we have recently been talking again, to BC Housing about their housing hub program and the low interest or no interest loans that they can give to developers. How does that affect the viability of these projects and I guess the lift that could possibly give them?
And counselor, in regards to the funding programs, there are several different ones. AHOP, I am not too familiar with the details, but it often comes down to some of the conditions that are required from the funding application. So some of them do require zoning adoption by council at the time of receiving funding. So sometimes it is contingent upon that, and some developers may find it challenging to time that correctly. And so that is a consideration. In general, the funding programs, depending on how they're structured, they can help with some of the affordability of the units. But as we know, if land prices keep going up, sometimes the development approvals process plus the construction timeline outpaces or is a bit lags behind the funding application. So as prices go up, then the affordability of the units cannot be covered by the funding in certain instances. So it does come down to the project itself and the timing of how long it takes to go from application all the way to construction completion.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
definitely some nuances, but it can, that the lower interest rates would obviously be helpful.
Thanks for
And
that.
one of the key issues, when we run these numbers for developers is the time it takes for project approval, and the amount, because a lot of the times these developers are borrowing a lot of the money, and so the longer a project takes, the higher their costs. So increasing speeding up approval times can have a really big impact on a developer's bottom line. So if there is a way to, obviously the lower interest rates with BC Housing will have a really big impact, but speeding up approvals can also have a significant impact as well.
Yeah, and we already do have that, where if affordable housing project is put forward, they go to the top of the list as far as the development permits. But I guess one more question I want to ask about going back to the housing spectrum. If we took single-family homes off the list, as in we put a moratorium on the building of single-family homes, how would that affect the viability of these multifamily home projects? It's something that's being done in other places, New Zealand and some places in the States.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, in those kinds of scenarios, there's single family zones are then allowing for in the more kind of older core of Cumberland with older single family homes, you couldn't buy one, tear it down, and build a new single family home. Instead, you'd have to replace it with townhomes. I think that could, that could improve affordability. It would make more units, missing middle units available. And it kind of focuses developers on the types of projects that the community is looking for, versus, buying an old single family home and flipping it. It would focus the development sector on the types of projects that, on building townhomes and apartments, and I think that would improve. I mean, it would improve the number of units available, of those types of units available, and could, by supply and demand, improve the affordability as well.
Great. Thank
And
you.
to add to that, I think it goes back to the land lift question as well, as to what it's being rezoned to, because then that would impact the land value of the property. and how much additional value it would generate. And from that, like a project analysis could be done from the developer's perspective, whether they could make those units, like whether it could be a viable project and what they could sell for and what they could go for.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you so much for this. It was a very dense report, so your going through it was actually quite helpful, just to sort of help clarify the thoughts that are running around in my mind. So we have done, we have created R1a Zoning, which is essentially tripled the amount of density allowed in the village, basically the core, which I think has helped develop a lot more housing. It certainly has not helped with affordability. Nothing we do seems to help with affordability. So the whole, if you build more, that will bring the prices down argument just isn't playing out here. And I certainly would never want to see an $800 square foot price range in this village. I know our assessment went up by 55% last year, and I think that's why our prices haven't come up to the construction, to meet that construction gap, is because the prices jumped so much already. The market just won't tolerate, the houses are sitting more. So, the VCMU1 zone was very interesting and disappointing. As Councillor Kettler said, the 4 stories is challenging. I would hate to see the whole core of that zone be 4 stories. I think it would dramatically change the character and scale of the community, and I think that character and scale does so much for our downtown core. It makes it really pedestrian friendly, and obviously bike friendly and people friendly. So I actually, when I realized that it might be a little too risky to lower it to 1.5 and then give a density bonus to 2, I thought, well, let's just lower it to 1.5, period, and leave it alone. Because right now we're incentivizing the destruction of historical buildings for 4-story boxes. And I think from the general analysis of the report that it might be, the opportunities are actually in the RM2 and I2, those other zones. So not the ones that have been recently redeveloped, but the other ones that we may be able to incentivize current owners to redevelop because they bought the land at a time when it was dirt cheap. And so curious about how, if you have any ideas on tools of how to, most of your scenarios were about the current owner selling for redevelopment, and are there things we could be doing that would incentivize current owners to be developing? So that's one question.
One major cost is for developers is parking.
Yeah.
And parking requirements, and especially in the VCMU zone, to provide underground parking is a huge cost. And that was one of the real benefits of one of the proposals that we saw that had this elevator parking system was helping with making the project viable, both from a lot of the other amenities like bike parking space, that type of thing was underground. So above ground there was more room for additional housing units. Reducing parking space is lowering the parking requirements can have a real impact on development viability. That's one of the biggest ones that we see in projects. Otherwise, you know, in some communities, like the green space requirements in projects can really, the site coverage can really limit viability, the usage of the site. And then approval times, as I mentioned, can be a real significant cost that can hurt a lot of projects. Jody, was there something else that you wanted to mention?
I think in terms
Parking?
and not in terms of parking, but in terms of
Okay.
incentivizing existing landowners to perhaps sell their properties. One of the things we took into consideration in our analysis is a premium on the land acquisition cost. So it's the land assessment value plus a premium of 25% at least to account for the developer having to purchase the land from the landowner that way.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And from incentives, you know, we've looked at development incentives, and that wasn't really a part of this study, but we've looked at them for a lot of other communities, and parking's a huge one. Speed of approvals is a big one. More so than you know, a tax holiday or what else was a tax holiday or relaxation of DCCs, or those don't move the needle that much as parking does, and the speed of approvals.
Thank you. And then my other question, I think, is for staff. So we did all the multifamily residential except MU1. What's the logic around that?
No particular logic. But yeah, I mean, the MU1 has a comprehensive development agreement on title. We could consider increasing, you could increase the density for the multifamily in the MU1. That's possible. You can't decrease it beyond the number of units that are in the comprehensive development agreement for the multifamily. I think we've talked about this before. You could, through the zoning, require a rental component within the existing multifamily areas. It might affect the viability, again, without also increasing the density potentially in multifamily.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Sproul.
What is there left to say? It is definitely a technical thing that I had to read through twice. It doesn't sound like very good news, really, for Cumberland. I mean, we were, 2 months ago, we were full of hope and promise, but given what's happened to the markets just recently and the ability to borrow money, it would, as our consultants say, make it difficult for anybody who is starting out in development, because they don't have land already to develop. So the cost of the land and the coming up with these ways of getting some kind of bonus. So I'm not sure what we can do. One thing, maybe I've understood this a bit wrongly, but if we start tampering with exemptions for parking or anything that could be seen by the public, by the current taxpayers as anything that could be seen by our current residents, taxpayers, to be favoring developers, that would have to be sorted out, the language around that. So, not really sure where we should go from here with this.
I would just like to add a few comments along those lines. I'm very concerned about what this presents to us. We're never going to solve the housing problem. It's going to continue on. And we have to step very carefully that we don't initiate something that is going to have a very negative impact, especially on our residential homes in the older part of the community, of keeping the heritage houses. I think they're very important to the community. I remember a lot of people that lived in the newer houses that wanted to buy in the older section of town because they love the older houses so much, and they've done a lot of work on them to restore them. So there's not only the commercial core, there's a residential component to that also that we need to be protecting. And I've hear lots from other people that just love walking around it in the evenings, just looking at the houses and all the different character that they have. So I think we're in a very, very interesting position in that we need to be very, very careful with whatever we decide to do. And your report, yes, I like the others, had read it a number of times and reread it. I even made notes to try and help me along. And yeah, I'm going to be having another discussion afterwards for some more points of clarification. But I agree that we need to do, it's almost like we need to take one of the properties at a time and deal with that at that time that something is coming forward. Because I do think there's people, even though the interest rates are going up and things are happening, people still want to come here and live. And that's very obvious. And yeah, I had somebody knocking on my door yesterday looking for a place to live. The house they were renting has been sold. They know it's when the new owners come, they're going to increase the rent by at least $500 a month. And that we're losing people that want to be here. And that's very difficult. Yeah. So thank you very much for all your work. You obviously deal with it all the time, so you understand it. And yes. And thank you very much. Karen has something else she'd like to say.
I do actually have a question for the JP and Jody. Just from your experience working through the shifts in markets, can you give us a little bit of a prognosis where construction and housing markets are headed in general? And we won't hold you to this, but might be helpful for us.
Yeah, just listening to the comments and questions of the councillors and the mayor, and construction costs and land values and the ability of people to pay for units, like these are kind of moving. The problem, the thing with real estate is they don't move quickly and necessarily. And land values, if you're a landowner that has a site that's ripe for redevelopment in Cumberland, you probably have a value in your head that you want to get for that land. And right now, as a developer, if I'm as a developer, I can't afford to pay that person that amount of money to build units with what people are paying. Eventually, someone might have to accept a lower land value, but that takes time. Like in a lot of communities, there's people that own properties that just refuse to sell because they have an idea in their head of what the land is worth. But given construction costs what they are, and given people's ability to pay for units and interest rates going up, it would make sense that land values could go down, but it's just going to take time for that to happen. So eventually people have to live somewhere, and development has to occur. A lot of people want to move to Cumberland, so prices will probably go up because there's people maybe selling from Vancouver that have a little bit more money that can afford to push values a little bit. But we're reaching limits to the ability for people to pay, and if development doesn't happen, then all of a sudden construction costs are going to go down. So if people aren't buying the lumber, if the construction crews aren't busy, then all of a sudden their rates are going to go down as well. But it's so there's possibility for movement in what people can pay, land values. There's going to be pressure on land values because developers won't be able to pay potential asking rates, and if development doesn't happen, then construction costs could start to go down. So there's quite a few variables at play. It just seems like it's something that's going to need to take time. I mean, the inflation is not as bad in Canada as it is in other jurisdictions in the OECD, but we're still seeing it, and the forecasts of where inflation is going to go, it varies, and some people think that it might slowly start to drift down. In which case, that'll bring down construction costs and that'll improve the pro formas that we're looking at. There's quite a few, but can costs continue to go up? Like that's hard to see, and like the counselor said, it's hard to imagine apartments going for $800,000 in Cumberland. If we're hitting a limit there, then either land values have to come down or construction costs have to come down, and that's just going to take some time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. We do have to move on. So thank you for your report and the discussion. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
It's time for question period. So anybody that would like to ask a question that was on the agenda, please email question period. Note, please limit to questions only. It's info@cumberland.ca. And we will wait for an amount of time, 5 minutes.
We do have some questions by
Okay.
email. This is regarding the density bonus report. Is the land lift that is contributed to the village sometimes would be the value of some of the units being non-market rent or lower affordable housing? Yeah. Is the land lift that is contributed to the village could be the value of some of the units being non-market rent or lower affordable housing?
Just want to make sure I understand the question. So that's the idea between that we're checking into whether the village can capture part of the land lift. So that land lift results in, if you have zoning to higher density, so you have a base density in your zone, you have a bonus density. So if you want to have this additional density, which will give you a higher land value, then we want a part of that chunk, that lift. And that would be in the form of affordable housing or some other potentially a financial contribution to an amenity. So I hope that makes sense. So what the consultants were referring to as affordable housing, just to clarify, was affordable home ownership for some of the zones. If you looked at that, 10% less market to be more affordable home ownership. So it's not necessarily affordable rental. So that's what they were basing it on because it was so tight.
Okay.
And a second question. In the VCMU zone, instead of increasing heights, could you request low-cost housing in exchange for parking relaxation or saving heritage facades?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So one of the things that came out for staff from this report, and I put on the next steps, is I think for starters we need to be really clear what we want in the in our VCMU1 zone, and I think that's a really important piece of the OCP review because it's so central to the village's identity. And markets shift, and I think it's very difficult to capture land values at a time when everything is so much in flux, especially recently. Interest rates are going up, values are going up. So I think what staff is looking at is our focus is what do we want in the VCMU1, and there's other values in the VCMU1 besides density and that is heritage protection and those other things. So I think it's a more important discussion that staff is looking really to have as part of the OCP review. That's the
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Thank you.
And one more, do we really want to have old homes ripped down to have townhomes filling up the old part of Cumberland?
Good question.
I just touched on that one, and I think it's very important that we retain the old houses. I really do. I think it's part of Cumberland to see those houses. I think that's why a lot of people come in here.
I
Okay?
think there's still, I would just to add, I didn't have a chance to make concluding comments, but there's still a lot of value in the research that we just got to inform staff when we're going through a rezoning process with a developer to understand perhaps what the performers, what they're doing for developers, understand the densities that they might be asking for, needing for affordable housing. And we will have a report coming back on the housing incentives.
Yeah.
near
I
future,
think
right?
there's more of a
For affordable
process that
housing.
we're going to be going through. Thank you very much. Okay, we have closed portion.
I can do that. That council close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter to consider the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose.
Seconder.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn?